With an estimated 140,000 people living without shelter, California has the highest homelessness rate in the entire country. In Los Angeles alone, there are approximately 50,000 of these unfortunate souls. When you see such staggering numbers, it's easy to lap them all up as statistics and forget that every single number is a person with a story. This is the story of one homeless man by the name of Terry. Terry was somewhere in his mid-60s. He couldn't remember his exact age, where he came from, or how long he'd been homeless. The years were muddled together in his mind. Every day, Terry would sit on a cardboard box on the corner, being ignored by most passersby, harassed by others, and sometimes, if he was lucky enough, given a small donation. He wasn't a drug addict, but he did waste a good portion of his earnings on cheap booze. There wasn't much for him to do, you see, and alcohol offered an escape from the misery and discomfort plaguing his day-to-day life. Terry's favorite and only pastime was reading books abandoned around town. Wherever you found Terry, you were sure to find a backpack full of novels nearby. He read everything from police stories to trashy Harlequin books. It didn't matter to him as long as it helped pass the time. At night, Terry would walk around town trying to find a park bench to sleep on. From time to time, when things got tough, he tried coming into a homeless shelter to recharge his metaphorical batteries. It was by no means luxurious, but being able to sleep on a springy mattress, if only for one night, made a huge difference. That's where we met. Terry came into Los Angeles Mission about once a week for a meal, where I volunteered for a few years while I got my nursing degree. He was always patient, courteous, and thankful for anything we could give him. He never complained about his situation to me or to any other volunteer. He would always give us a smile and a blessing when we served him before heading to a table and digging in. He was one of the few who actually picked up after himself and brought his tray back once it finished. Once in a while, he'd offer to help with the dishes, and we'd chat about nothing and everything. All in all, Terry was a kind soul. I'd been working at the mission for about 2 years. One night, as I was closing the kitchen, I spotted Terry sitting in the corner with a book in his lap, pawing ferociously at the back of his messy hair. Through the years of neglect, it had become a mob of tangled dreads, pointing in every direction, with twigs and sometimes bugs trapped between the strands. His hair dangled from his head all the way to his shoulders, but it was nothing compared to his beard, which was longer and messier. Dirt and dried food clutched to the coarse, curly mask of facial hair. Curious, I walked over to him. As I approached, I could hear him mumbling beneath his breath, something about needles and things crawling, but it was hard to decipher. I could smell the alcohol on his breath, so I figured he was talking about the book he was reading. As he continued to scratch at his head, I knelt down and asked what was wrong.
"Oh, nothing. It's fine. My head just itches something silly,"
he said. This was the first time I'd ever heard him complain. "Come on back, we'll check it out," I offered. He shook his head.
"Oh, no. I don't want to be a bother."
As he lowered his hands, I noticed his fingernails were caked with blood. "Looks like you hurt yourself, Terry. Come on, don't make me beg," I replied. Terry sighed heavily and pushed himself up. I could hear his old bones cracking as he straightened himself. We walked to a small bathroom in the back. It was intended for employees only, but we made exceptions from time to time. Terry sat on a stool, and I started to pull his hair back to take a look, but when I did, a large clump came out. Cringing, I tossed the twisted, dry, straw-like hair in the bin and dug in again, fully expecting to find ticks or head lice dancing on his scalp. To my surprise, I found neither. What I found was a lumpy, porous, ping-pong ball-sized nodule protruding from the back of his head. Near the center of the lump were 2 tiny dots that oozed pus when I applied pressure. This seemed to make Terry very uncomfortable, so I didn't play with it too much. The skin on and around the nodule was irritated and bloodied from Terry's scratching. Looks like an infected bug bite. I'll give you some Neosporin, alright? We'll see if that clears this up, I said. Terry nodded quietly. No more scratching it, okay? I asked as I applied the cool gel against his skin.
No scratching.
Terry promised. Good, I answered. I would have applied Band-Aid over the area, but I was doubtful it'd stay on. There was too much dirt, grime, and hair in the way. As my hands pulled back, a few tufts of hair remained stuck to them.
Thanks, ma'am. God bless,
said Terry as he rose to his feet and slowly made his way out of the bathroom. We didn't see each other for a few days. Next time Terry came around, he was looking a little worse for wear. Large bags had formed under his eyes and he didn't have quite as much pep in his step as he normally did. He didn't smile when I served him his meal, nor did he thank me as he walked off with his plate of food. Terry sat down, opened a worn paper bag, and stared at it. His eyes didn't track up and down the page. Instead, they were locked on a single spot as though he wasn't reading at all. The change in behavior had me a little concerned, so as soon as I had a break, I joined him at the table. He'd been sitting there for half an hour and hadn't taken a single bite out of the lasagna he usually wolfed down feverishly. Everything alright? I asked. He groaned and rubbed the back of his head. I could see several bald spots in his unkempt mane. Even his beard looked a little patchier than normal.
My head hurts a lot.
I remembered the bug bite and frowned. Maybe it had gotten worse. Let's get you checked out, buddy, I offered. He didn't fight me this time, merely stood up and moved towards the bathroom. Again, I set him on a stool and knelt down behind him. Touching his hair was horrible, not because it hadn't been properly cleaned or combed in ages, but because it seemed like every strand I touched came falling off. This couldn't be normal. After one larger clump cascaded to the ground, I spotted a long black creature wriggling about on the floor. I yelled and immediately brought my heel down on it, squashing it with a violent gush. Terry was startled by my outburst. I'm sorry, but you had a worm caught in your hair. It scared the bejesus out of me. I apologized. Just a symptom of sleeping on the streets, I figured. When I finally exposed the nodule, I noticed it had grown by about half an inch. The skin on and around it was very irritated and flaked off at the slightest contact. As I examined the swollen node, I noticed 4 odd strands of hair coming out of it. Had they been there before? Though Terry's hair had gone gray a long time ago, these were pitch black. They seemed a lot thicker than normal hair too. It must have been my imagination, but I swear that when I reached over and touched one, it recoiled. Terry, it looks like it's gotten worse. We should take you to the ER just in case, I said. Terry shook his head quickly.
No! No! No!
I frowned. They'll take good care of you.
No more doctors! No more needles!
He replied, jumping to his feet. I set him back down with a sigh. Alright, buddy. No doctors, I agreed. There wasn't much I could do to help poor Terry, aside from applying him more antiseptic cream. This time, I wrapped his head with gauze to make sure it wouldn't rub off. Come back tomorrow, okay? I want to keep an eye on this, I told him calmly. He didn't respond, just got up and went back to his meal, leaving me to clean up the mess in the bathroom. His hair was all over the place, and it took me at least 10 minutes to sweep it clean. I didn't want the other volunteers to get grossed out. The next day, I waited for Terry to return. Every time the door opened, I looked up hoping I'd see him, but each time a different face emerged. By the time my shift was over, I was worried. It was raining hard that night, and I figured Terry had sought refuge in a bus shelter near his favorite panhandling spot. Borrowing a few supplies from the first aid kit, I took off in my car looking for him. I saw so many Terrys that night. Some young, some old, some drunk, some high, some wet, some cold, but all of them homeless. Just when I was about to give up, I found my Terry huddled up in the corner under a blanket of newspaper. I ran out of my car as fast as my feet could take me, fearing for a moment that he was dead. Thankfully, he emitted a groan when I shook him and sat him up to look at me. "Terry, buddy, you're supposed to stop by tonight," I told him. He rubbed his eyes and looked at me with a vacant expression on his face. It was as though he didn't recognize me. I carefully pulled him to his feet and helped him to my car, sitting him on the back seat where I would have a bit more lighting. Terry looked positively awful, his face sunken in like someone who'd gone through a year's worth of chemo treatments. I couldn't even fathom how he'd wound up in such a state. "I'm going to take off the bandage and check that bug bite, okay?" I said. There was no reply. I forced a smile and slowly unwrapped the gauze. His hair. Good God, his hair. It was so brittle and peeled away like leaves in the autumn wind. Then off came the last layer of gauze, and I felt my stomach sink to my knees. Those black hairs I'd seen the night before had grown thicker. They stuck out of his skin and wriggled about as though they had a mind of their own. It wasn't fair to call them hairs anymore. No, they were something completely different. Tendrils, moving, twitching, slithering. Tendrils that shot towards my hands the second they were exposed. Screaming, I pulled back and fell on my butt as the tendrils began to slide up and down Terry's scalp, tugging out every clump of hair they could grab. I sat on the wet pavement in shock, watching the deforestation of Terry's scalp in utter disbelief. The discarded patches of hair began to slide towards me like caterpillars. I could just barely make out a few of those black tendrils at the center of the mass, as though they were wearing Terry's mane as a fur coat. My feet instinctively kicked them back whenever they got near, but there were so many of them that some managed to crawl on my legs. Terry began to groan and shake violently, lifting his arm to his head. He scratched at the lump, peeling away the skin until, suddenly, I heard a tearing sound. The skin over the nodule peeled away like a rind on an orange, and inside the wound, I saw something staring back at me, coated in a viscous fluid that seemed like a mix of gel and blood. Was an eye. That's when I lost it. I bounced to my feet and ran, screaming for help, begging anyone I came across to call 911 as I peeled the wriggling hair-coated worms off me. I didn't know what to do or how to explain what I had seen. Terry was gone by the time I calmed down enough to think straight and call for an ambulance. The only thing left in the back seat were a few brittle strands of hair, blood, and a bag full of books and empty beer bottles. Terry's body was found by the river the next day. His head hollowed out and a large fracture at the back of his skull. Approximately 49,999 homeless people live in Los Angeles. That's a staggering number, isn't it? It's easy to think them as just a statistic, but don't forget that every single one of those people have a story. This was Terry's.